Jeff and Lynn, thank you so much for talking to us today about your new venture, Inclusive Capital Partners, and how you are seeking to identify companies and business leaders who can create systemic and scalable change toward a more sustainable, inclusive form of capitalism. Jeff, let me start with you. You recently stepped down from Value Act Capital, a highly successful investment firm that you actually helped establish 2 decades ago, to start this new venture. Tell us what your thinking was behind the shift, what your vision is for this new effort, how it differs from what is conventionally described as ESG or impact investing.
I guess I view this as the next wave of governance. In 2000, when I started Value Act, the shareholder director relationship didn't really exist. Shareholders, directors didn't talk, and yet the shareholders were the owners. And so to put a voice behind the shareholder with regards to the governance of the company seemed obvious to me. And to a certain extent, Ron, I think we've gone too far, where the owner has now too much voice and too much power to the exclusion of the other constituents. So here I am as an activist investor, and I think because the voiceless are now things like customer, workforce, environment, planetary health, I want to give a voice to those constituents. And I do think that's where the value is going to be created. I think finance, because it's been free for so long, has been well played. Margins have been maximized, balance sheets have been made totally efficient. And the next big breakthrough return opportunities are those that solve these new constraints, environmental and social.
Lynn, you have been focused on galvanizing companies and investors for many years to develop a more sustainable and inclusive form of capitalism. What excites you most about this new venture? Tell us some of the things that you're thinking about.
Well, you're right, Ron. Since the financial crisis, I have been working on the idea that we need to reform capitalism, that the social contract that holds our society together and our economy together was really being frayed, very obviously in the financial crisis, and since then even more, because we've become much more aware of the racial problems in our country connected to the inequality problem and the environmental problem. So I had been working on it for a long time and very focused on the absolute belief I have, which is that if we're going to have system change, it's not going to come from government. It's not going to come from philanthropy. It's not going to come from a few brave CEOs who stand up and say, I care. It's only going to come if at scale, value is created for shareholders who invest in companies that, as Colin Meyer from Oxford said, solve the problems of people and planet. And what's exciting to me about being able to be a partner with Jeff in Inclusive Capital Partners is that Jeff brings epic investing expertise and a team that he's built at Value Act, that he's brought to Inclusive, who dig deeply into sectors and into companies to find that connection between companies that are undervalued because of the way that they are not doing the right thing for people and planet, coming in, becoming one of the top 5 shareholders in the company, and then working with those companies to fix those problems. What happens? The problems get solved for society and shareholder value gets created. And what does that create? That creates a race to the top, where if you take a laggard in an industry and suddenly the multiples are high, and the multiples are high because of the way they're treating their people and their planet, then everybody else in that sector goes. So this is such an unbelievable opportunity for me to be where the rubber hits the road, where the investments are being made, where the principle is being proven. I couldn't be more excited.
You're both talking about bringing a level of investment intensity to ESG that at least I don't think I've seen to date. Jeff, you and I have been on panels together talking about the importance of shareholder engagement with boards, particularly uh, long-term investors like State Street and others who are really invested in the company for for the long term. That includes engaging rather than divesting from things like fossil fuel companies. How does inclusive capital think about engagement with energy companies in the context of the systemic change that you aspire to when it comes to people and planet?
We start with the externalities of the business first, and ESG would be at the second. And when I talk about the externalities of the business, it is what are the true costs to their core business. And it's interesting that, we're very early in this idea of return-driven environmental and social active investing. I mean, we're real early. And most businesses that are serving their customers with highly convenient and accessible product have externalities attached to them, whether it's McDonald's in obesity or Coke in plastic packaging that are not yet incorporated in their stock price. I think unless they work aggressively to fix some of these problems, they over time will be incorporated in their stock price. The one thing about energy, and by the way, energy 10 years ago was saying the same thing. The hydrocarbon molecule stores energy better and is more convenient than any form of energy there is. So we're just going to give our customers what they want. It turns out 10 years later, the externalities of oil has become an effect on their stock price. It has increasingly become the environmental failing of their core business that's impacting the stock price, not necessarily the performance of their financials. When that happens, we get very excited because the return dynamics kick in where the risk reward gets quite good because the stock price is, in the case of big oil, at 30-year lows. And their role in the clean energy transition is definitely something you can envision because they have the workforce, they have the geologists, they have the project management skills, they have the applied and emerging technologies that reside in their companies. They have the incumbency that we look for. So, and they have the capital, right? So we're really excited about working with big oil because the pressure is there for change. And the way you generate idiosyncratic return is to more aggressively change the strategy and or the capital allocation to fix the failing as perceived by the market. And so it is a place where coal went there first, and there were no activists involved to get coal to realize they were an energy company, not a coal company. And they just went away because they didn't address their externality. They stayed in their lane and they became obsolete. We think big oil is as long as you have a CEO that has a long enough time horizon, not 2 years or 3 years, but 5 or 10 years. We think there's an opportunity to work with the CEOs of these companies and use their capital and their expertise to be part of the solution. We think there's a return there since the companies currently are valued as if they're liquidating assets.
Jeff, Bill Gates agrees with you. He has said that it makes no sense to be focused on divestment. In fact, he said that a more positive climate impact could be had by focusing on those kinds of technologies and innovation that can actually make a change. What's your view about the role of technology and innovation in your investment thesis here?
There are threshold technologies that change everything. Renewable energy is great, but the ability to turn it into a baseload fuel requires storage, and so storage becomes the threshold technology. And how is storage going to be executed? Is kind of one of the great questions. So then you go down the kind of the technology rabbit hole, and you see things like you see things like hydrogen that start to emerge in 2030 as kind of the missing link, because you can use hydrogen to store energy for months in tanks as opposed to 5 hours in a battery. And so, the thing about, the end game, batteries is an interesting technology. It's very extractive. We don't know what we're going to do with all these car batteries that come back, into circulation in 2028. So for me, the key is to identify those really clean, elegant solutions that are not extractive, and that's the big challenge. That's the big challenge for humanity. And you end up with things like controlled environment agriculture instead of open fields. You end up with hydrogen. A lot of it is more systems integration than it is basic research, in my opinion. So, if Bill's going to figure out nuclear fusion, that's awesome. That's the end game of all end games. But I think my focus is using applied technology to find these really elegant and clean solutions that address problems over the next 10 or 15 years.
Lynn, let me shift the topic a little bit. Jeff is on record as saying that he's proud of the level of gender diversity at Inclusive Capital Partners, and he hopes that his successor will be a CEO. How important is it to set that example as you think about the firm going forward?
Well, just so you know, I don't have a vested interest in this. I'm older than Jeff is, so I'm not going to succeed as CEO. That's for sure. But I have great admiration for Jeff's intentionality about bringing in women on an equal basis. We're a 50-50 firm. And, 25 years ago, I was put on a corporate board and I was on CNBC. The ceiling has been broken. Women are going to come on board and find their way and be leaders in business, politics. And, when I was young, women were still going to work with white gloves on. When I graduated from law school, you couldn't have imagined a woman president, even though Ruth Bader Ginsburg was one of my professors. So I had great female role models. But I sat there 25 years ago and I thought I was at the pointy end of the spear, but that there would be great change. And here we are 25 years later. And women are still underrepresented in all forms of businesses at the top level. They do great in universities. Scores are higher, great in law school. And then as they continue on their career path, they don't do so well. So now, 25 years ago, I thought every girl just had to work hard and it could work out for them. Now I think we need intentional leaders like Jeff who say, I am going to seek out those women. So I'm very proud of Jeff.
Hey, Ron, what's interesting about boards and companies is that the boards have relegated succession planning and talent management and talent development to the executive team for future leaders inside the company. But boards, for some reason, have taken no obligation to develop talent themselves, which I think is just a miss in corporate governance. So the only way we're going to really have enough women that aren't safe for board members to include a woman, because the women that are on boards, tend to be 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 board seats because they have a quote unquote experience. We haven't been able to grow the pool if that's the box check that's required. It's a very risk averse way of doing things, and boards are risk averse in general. So they need to step up and take some risk and develop talent to expand the pool. So they'll for the last 7 board seats that where the Spring Fund has designated a board member have been women, and they're all in their 30s. And that's really, really exciting for me, because they're going to be the the woman that has the experience in their 40s when they're in the game, and everybody's going to want to put them on their board. So we need to grow the pool, and we're doing the same thing with our intern program with people of color, to try to make sure every day we have 2 interns on site. Lynn's going to work with us on this, that are getting real experience in our business while they're freshmen and sophomores in college, so they can go get that junior job at the bank, and we can expand the pool from the bottoms up.
Yeah, that's terrific. This whole idea of taking a chance is actually quite important. Jeff, 2 other areas of focus at Inclusive Capital are food and education. Why did you choose those areas, and what's the systemic change that you're hoping to drive there?
Societal inequities are a challenge for business, the way they're executed, the way the business works today, which is an investment in your people, an investment in your customers' health. In some cases, is more expense, not less expense. And so the idea of like fair wages is really almost hard to do if you're trying to check an earnings, trying to hit earnings numbers on a quarterly basis. Lynn's embankment project works on this in particular. If you don't put customer trust and workplace culture on the balance sheet, it gets expensed. So how do we change that conversation and get those assets, quote unquote, on the balance sheet? So when one of the most difficult challenges we have is educating the workforce. And so we've worked with a company called Strategic Education, which is an online for-profit education company, which according to Obama was an industry that caused much harm, which I agree with. But Strategic Education is the one company that got through gainful employment well enough because their student outcomes were better than the industry. And they were really the first to adopt this mission of getting their students educated in the workforce in a personalized, convenient way without loans. So they're committed to now an enterprise model where they work with companies because it improves retention at companies and they've set up a product set called Workforce Edge to move their whole population to a corporate benefit paid for by the employer, because it's good for the employee and good for the employer. And they're about a third of the way through. And the goal for us, Ron, is to get companies like this to define their mission by putting it into their comp plan. So in this particular case, they've agreed to put loans per student into their comp plan and get paid on that, and to talk about it every quarter. So you start to change the conversation on a quarterly earnings call because they're talking about these non-financial metrics. And by the way, that'll drive the value of their business if they move it to an enterprise sale versus a kind of a Google recruitment business like it is today. So that's an example of like a business whose core mission presents great opportunity to provide the solution. The market views it lowly because to them it looks like a classic for-profit education company, which has been in harm's way politically. And to their surprise, over the next 5 years, the whole business will shift. It'll be predominantly a corporate sale at the enterprise, and will become a human capital partner, development partner versus an online for-profit education company. When you think about food, the idea of nature pushing back, the constraint really is fresh water. So in America, most of our tomatoes come from either Mexico, which is kind of pesticide-laden hothouses, or it's coming from California, where you're running out of water. And so if you go deep into that, you end up, looking at things like controlled environment agriculture, where you repurpose rainwater. And you have 30 or 40 times the productivity versus open field farming. And by the way, the company that we're working with, App Harvest, is putting a controlled environment agriculture curriculum into Kentucky, where we're building all of our greenhouses, so that we're actually addressing the labor force, and we're going to pay all of our labor force, fair wages with full health care, which is not done in terms of how product is grown today. It's grown in Mexico with slave labor, or it's grown in California with immigrants. So we're trying to change the system in food with the labor force as well as with the growing techniques.
What I love about what you're doing is even the problem solving is inclusive. Maybe one last question for both of you. These are challenging times. What gives you hope about the future? Either one of you can start.
Well, I think the car's been running on a few pistons, but not all pistons. I mean, philanthropy has stepped up along the way. Policy, companies, we're hitting this place where we may be hitting on all cylinders as companies start to advocate for policy because they're putting money behind carbon abatement, for instance, and it becomes a competitive advantage if they're investing heavily, for instance, in carbon abatement, because their costs are going to be lower than their competition. We just haven't seen companies, for instance, show up as advocates for policy change. They've actually been obfuscating, in most cases, to do business as usual. So something's happening where the markets, policy, and philanthropy are mutually reinforcing. And then this is the car can really run well. As Lynn says, it's been a many years of a race to the bottom to get cheaper and faster, and frankly dirtier and less healthy. And I get a sense, with your leadership around ESG issues, that we're kind of turning that into more of a race to the top with all the systems firing.
Lynn, what gives you hope?
What gives me hope? The Bible says faith, hope, and love abide, and the greatest of these is love. I believe that there's a generation younger than we are that really is willing to understand that it means more to them sort of to love their neighbor, to have a life that's meaningful, than to live a completely selfish life. And I think there are a lot of them, and I think that they're going to affect our political outcomes and our social outcomes. I guess I would say young people give me hope.
Well, for me, I think what gives me hope is the two of you. I think bringing this kind of intensity and focus to investing, I think is going to pave the way for lots of others. I think you'll show the way. I think you'll help both the providers of capital and those that actually deploy the capital on how a better way can be taken going forward. So thanks both of you for sharing what you're doing with your new initiative. It's really exciting. I'm excited to watch it, and Lynn, I'm excited to be part of what you're doing on the coalition. So again, thank you both very much.